Good morning, Mr. Campomori.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
I am waiting from your interview
Uh,
and then I will prepare my lecture for tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's get straight into it. As the SIforREF project leader, you are coordinating a European research project involving partners from 5 different cities and regions from 4 different countries. The aim, let's say it on a very simple line, is to develop overarching policy recommendations for the inclusion of refugees in Central Europe using social innovation. Before I'm asking you on your current work in the project, let me briefly summarize the main contributions the SIforREF project has made so far. So for me, I think the first ambition of this collaboration was to establish a common understanding of what is social innovation in respect to the inclusion of refugees into society and the labor market, and also what goals social innovative policies and practices should contribute to in order to be valuable. A key outcome in mid-2020 were the SIforREF guidelines on social innovation. They are downloadable from our project's website. And in a second step, the team investigated for each of the respective partner regions which local refugee initiatives and projects are following what we understand as social innovative approach. And also, we scrutinized on what are the framework conditions that make these projects successful. So we have compiled these projects as the so-called best practices and highlighted them also on our social media channels. So, Ms. Campomori, we are now entering some of the third project phase of SIforREF. Can you explain to me what the so-called pilots are all about and what role they are playing in the further course of the SIforREF project?
Yes, of course. As you said in your introduction, one of the challenges of the project is to demonstrate that social innovative practices for the integration of refugees are possible and also they are effective. They could be effective. And in the first part of the project, as you mentioned, we explored both the concept of social innovation and then some possible application of social innovation, as you told, the best practices. And now we are entering in this phase, which has the ambition to implement some socially innovative practices that we call pilots. The pilots usually are a kind of we build on some existing projects in most of the pilot that we are implementing. And the idea is to grasp what works in this previous project and try to implement, maybe improving the existing project in the different regions. Why it's important for us? Because we think that if we demonstrate that these pilots really work and are effective in the aim, which is refugee inclusion, we can also in some way commit policymakers and stakeholders in take some agreements for implementing not just as pilot action, but just mainstream policies, these activities.
Mhm. Okay, thank you very much. Can you scope on which topics these pilots cover?
Yes, since the beginning, we decided to focus on 2 dimensions. One is the labor market integration, and the other one is social integration. Of course, these 2 dimensions are very much related one another. And some of our pilots try to keep both the focus, labor market integration and social integration. Specifically, for example, Vienna and Berlin, which are the 2 biggest cities in the consortium, are implementing 2 pilots each, and they are focusing on labor integration. To be more detailed, Berlin is focusing especially on women with refugee status. They are implementing 2 pilots. One pilot is called Worker for Refugees. and it is devoted to unemployed people, especially women, with training, workshop for exploring the skills, the competencies of these people. And the other pilot is very specific because it is devoted to women that want to start a self-employed activity, especially women which for some reason are not reached from the official offices for refugees. And then in Vienna, we have labor market integration again as focus. There are also very interesting projects. One is called Magda's Hotel. The Magda's Hotel is an existing social business, let's say, hotel, which already employ, I think, 16 refugees.
Mhm.
The idea of the pilot is to improve this project and create apprenticeship for other people with refugee background. And then the other pilot of Vienna is called Volunteers for Volunteers, a nice title again. And the idea, which is also, I mean, it is more than idea, it's an hypothesis from sociologists and psychologists, is that if you, in some way, if you try to, if you take a people, which is a volunteers, maybe with the migrant background, and this volunteer become a teacher, let's say, an educator from another people with the migrant background or anyway fragile background, these two people can strengthen both their skills and competencies. So the idea is to create this process in Vienna, building on an existing project held by Caritas Vienna. And then there are other projects in Ljubljana, Bologna, and Parma. In Ljubljana, the focus is again labor market integration, but with the focus also on social integration, because our team in Ljubljana is taking 25 refugees, and they are exploring, interview them in order to explore their needs, what they would like to do, their aspiration. And in Bologna and in Parma, the idea is to strengthen the network of people, autochthones, so Italians, let's say, and refugees, in order to mitigate the prejudice towards refugees, because we in Italy, I am Italian, we had a lot of problems with intolerance and even racism in the last 2-3 years.
Wow, these are very exciting projects all over. So every partner region is somehow addressing very specific issues and target groups also you mentioned. So how do these individual projects help to reach then later on an overarching set of policy recommendations for the inclusion of refugees later on?
I mean, that's a challenge, of course,
Mhm.
because the pilots are implemented in the cities. But now we are in the process of, first of all, evaluating the finding of the pilots, because we want to grasp what really is effective about these practices. And then we are going to share the result, the finding, and also we are trying to create some transnational relationship between stakeholders, even with some travel. So some people will move from a city to another. COVID, of course, was a stop in this process, but we are trying to develop this in October and maybe in next spring in Berlin and then in Vienna. And through this transnational exchange between not just stakeholders, but also politicians, because our final goal is to convince politicians, because politicians can decide some binding policies and decisions. The idea is that finally we are building a kind of memorandum of understanding, which is we want to, to state some very practical way for affording in more effective way the issue of social integration of refugees. And we will have a final conference where also politicians will be invited. But before that, we will have a very intense activity of communication, because we want that they arrive to this final conference in a way that they really know what's happened before, in the 3 years before.
Well, this is a very exciting and intensive project. And yeah, thank you very much for this conversation today. I think this will give our audience a pretty good introduction on the pilots and also on the next step in the SIforREF project. Ms. Campoamori, thank you very much.
Thank you to you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.